Welcome to the GMAT Strategy Podcast. You're here because you believe there's a better way to study for the GMAT, and so do we. We created the GMAT strategy to maximize your results and minimize your effort so you can get to the fun parts about business school and life as quickly as possible. My name is Isaac Puglia, and I've been teaching GMAT classes and tutoring privately for the GMAT for almost a decade, and I've achieved a 99th percentile score on the GMAT and helped thousands of students get into the business schools of their choice. I'm excited to be a part of your MBA journey since we all at TGS think our world can benefit from the best possible business leaders that we can find. If this show is bringing you value, please share it with your friends and family who are studying so that together we can make this process as easy and as painless as it can possibly be. Let's go. Welcome to Real GMAT Problems, episode 23. Doing real GMAT problems generally helps make test day a lot easier for people, so let's talk through a few examples. The problems we're going to go through are from the 11th edition of the Official Guide for GMAT Review, and you can web search them if you'd like to follow along visually. Just so you know, the 11th edition of the Official Guide is out of print, and that's partly why I'm going through questions from that book, because that way, if you purchase this year's Official Guide, there shouldn't be any overlap between the questions we'll work through here and that book. The Official Guide contains retired problems that have appeared on past GMAT exams. So these are going to be really representative of the kind of things you're going to see on test day. I'll give you a chance to work through the solution on your own if you want to, and then I'll discuss my recommendations for what to learn from each one. I recommend pausing after I read through each problem and trying to solve it, or at the very least, visualize how you would solve it. You probably won't be able to execute every step in your head if you're on the go, but just do your best. If you're in a situation where you could physically write down what you would write on test day, like if you're on a plane or a train, I highly recommend that. Here we go. This is problem number 78. The problem says, from January 1st, 1991 to January 1st, 1993, the number of people enrolled in health maintenance organizations increased by 15%. The enrollment on January 1st, 1993 was 45 million. How many million people, to the nearest million, were enrolled in health maintenance organizations on January 1st, 1991? I'll read that again for you. From January 1st, 1991 to January 1st, 1993, the number of people enrolled in health maintenance organizations increased by 15%. The enrollment on January 1st, 1993 was 45 million. How many million people, to the nearest million, were enrolled in health maintenance organizations on January 1st, 1991? Option A is 38. Option B is 39. Option C is 40. Option D is 41. And option E is 42. Again, really recommend pausing here and taking some time to think through your own solution. This is an interesting problem in that it appears that most people are setting it up correctly, but then struggling to execute the computation behind the problem. And normally it's the opposite of that in word problems, where people are really struggling with the organization and then executing the math okay. So let's think about how to execute this one well so that you're set up for success on something like this on test day. So first things first, it's usually a good idea to label things clearly when there's some kind of time change or a comparison between time periods like we have here. So I'd definitely be writing 1991 on the left side of my page and 1993 on the right side, or something similar to that you might be more comfortable with. But just like having some kind of visual organizational framework usually helps a lot in questions like this where we're comparing time periods. Then I usually like to fill in the known information first. So I would write 45 million under 1993 and also somehow note to myself visually that there is an increase of 15% in the enrollment going from 1991 to 1993. I might do some arrows or maybe just write 15% plus in between the two dates, like whatever makes sense to you there. But the point I'm trying to make is have some kind of relatively consistent way of organizing the information visually. As we've discussed so much in this series, a lot of this is to make sure I don't make a simple mistake. And if you've been following for a while, you've probably seen how easy it is to do for a lot of us. But I mean, like easy to to miss the problem as a result of bad visual organization. I think good visual organization is actually a major challenge for a lot of people. Um, but I've also found, and it's probably worth noting, that good organizational habits tend to pay off with faster results on word problems. And I think that's a little bit counterintuitive because it feels slower if you're setting up the problem carefully. But it's often easier to make connections between pieces of information when we can visualize those connections on the page in front of us. So it might feel a little slower, but I have found it to be faster in the long run. So I'd say that's more of an optional tip on problems like this. So it's probably a good idea for you to experiment and figure out what works best for you personally, but it's definitely a strong recommendation that you visualize the information somehow. So once I've got all that visualized, I can usually start to see how to set up the mathematical relationships, which in this situation is a percent change. So you've got a couple options with percent change questions. You can use the percent change formula, which is new minus old over old times 100. That works great in these kinds of questions. Or you could use a more standard algebra approach. For example, make a variable like x representing 1991's enrollment, which is unknown and also what we're solving for. And then you could do that number plus 15 over 100 times x, which is adding 15% of the original value to the original value. That's a 15% increase. And then you can just say that equals 45 million, which is the known net result total from 1993. Again, either way is fine. I recommend experimenting with both and figuring out what you personally are most comfortable with, and of course, what gets you the best results. I've often taken the algebra path in past questions in this series, so I'm just going to use the percent change path here to kind of mix things up and give you an example of how something different might look. To be clear, that's just for teaching purposes, though. On the exam, I always default to whatever I think is going to be the easiest approach on any specific problem, and I recommend that you do the same thing. It's only in practice that you'll want to experiment and try multiple approaches on questions. Every once in a while, you might try approach A, and that ends up not working, and then you flip over to approach B. That happens a lot at the higher levels of the quant section, I would say. But by test day, ideally, I think you'll want a good idea of which approach is best in which kind of situation, and you'll want to default to that unless there's an obvious reason to deviate. So with all that being said, let's set up our new minus old over old times 100 expression. So the new value is 45 million. That's pretty simple. The old value I defined as x, and I know the percent change is positive 15. So that's pretty much everything I need to make this expression work properly. So my expression would be 45 million minus x over x. That's new minus old over old. And then all that in parentheses times 100 and then equals 15. And that's my setup right there. So just kind of briefly touching on the value of the percent change formula, I think when you can set things up in familiar frameworks, it helps a lot of people under time pressure. So that I think is like maybe the argument for using the percent change formula as much as you possibly can. The argument for the algebra approach is just you personally feel more comfortable with that. Again, I don't think there's a clear right or wrong when it comes to problems like this, but just to help you make that decision, I thought I would offer that kind of side note. So let's go ahead and solve. Let's start to isolate x. If you're not so good with algebra, or you're just starting out on your GMAT path, and this is like one of the first touches you've gotten with the exam, we've got a math basics episode on how to reskill with algebra, if you feel like that'd be helpful for you, or if you feel like you never really understood algebra and equations well, that's going to be linked in the description of this content. You should just be able to click there. It should say equations and or algebra, and that should be exactly what you need. So let us know if you have questions or feedback on that. First, though, in order to isolate x, I would divide both sides of the equation by 100. So keep in mind, I've got, I'm just going to say 45 instead of 45 million. And honestly, I'd probably just write 45 there because all the answers are in millions anyway. So I'm going to have to take out those zeros. But if you find that confusing, you can just write 45 with 6 zeros after it for the whole problem, and it'll still work out just fine. But just for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to use 45 minus x over x times 100. So that times 100, if I want to isolate x, I want to get x by itself. That times 100 is like not x by itself. So I'm just going to move that over to the other side of the equation. So divide by 100 on both sides. That gets me 45 minus x over x equals 15 over 100. Then I'll multiply both sides by x to get rid of the denominator. That gets me 45 minus x equals 15 over 100 times x. And then I'll add x to both sides to get to consolidate the x terms, I guess is the way to think about that, combining like terms. Much more on that in the algebra episode I just mentioned. But to do that in this case, to add x to both sides, to do 15 over 100x plus x, I'm going to need a common denominator. Again, if this is an early touch for you with the exam, we've got a math basics episode on how to add fractions linked below as well. Probably just need to reskill with that. Probably were really good at adding fractions at some point in your life. If you never got good at adding fractions, now's your time. And that episode will help with that a lot. And I'll have more to say about math basics as we go through the episode, but I think for now that's good. So instead of adding x to both sides, I'm going to add 100 over 100 times x to both sides. And that allows me to add the 15 over 100x to x. If I execute that well, and I'm going to gloss over a lot of those micro steps here because that math basics information is there for you, and a lot of you will have been studying for a while, and you don't need reskilling on that stuff at this particular moment. That's going to get us 45 equals 115 over 100 times x. Okay, so if you need to come back to this equation later and write all that out on your paper to get it to feel the way that you want it to feel, that's totally fine. A lot of this stuff, when I was reskilling with it, I had to do it 4, 5, 6 times for it to really become second nature. And just don't be afraid to put those kind of reps in. It pays off. So from there, to isolate x, all I would need to do is divide both sides by 115 over 100. And just to be clear, I've said this before, but like you don't have to execute the algebra exactly the way that I'm executing it as long as it works out for you. I'm just giving you an example of what I like to do. So you might recall from what you've learned about fractions that dividing by a fraction, is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of that number. So I'm going to rewrite that step as 100 over 15 multiplied on both sides. So that's going to cancel out the 115 over 100, multiplying that by 100 over 115. That's just going to equal 1 on the right-hand side. That'll get me x by itself. And then on the left-hand side, I would have 100 over 115 times 45 over 1. And I like to do the 45 over 1 personally just to help me visualize what gets canceled where. I find that helps me make fewer mistakes, but technically it's 100 over 115 times 45. It's the same thing mathematically. So again, just give me some advice that I've found helpful. From here, I can make some cancellations because I can see that 5 is going to evenly divide both 115 and 45. They both end in a 5, and side note, any integer that ends in 5 or 0 will be divisible by 5, so I can help you reduce that kind of thing. 45 divided by 5 is 9, and 115 divided by 5 is 23. So if you're feeling like this is moving a little fast for you, then again, I just really recommend that math basics episodes on fractions. I'll teach you how to cancel things well. I'll teach you how to add fractions, subtract fractions, multiply, all the good stuff that we're using here to break down this official GMAT problem. So with 115 over 5, it's totally cool to do some long division there. I usually wouldn't expect that people have their times tables memorized past 20. In fact, most people rarely have them memorized much past 10 or 12. But for the GMAT, I think going up to 20 is a really good idea. It's definitely more of an advanced move to know off the top of your head what 15 times 17 is, but it really pays if you're going for like a really top score, let's say like above 645. So if that's a goal for you, then I'd recommend memorizing your times tables to 20. You don't have to love it. Yeah, but if you do love it, that's awesome. But it again, you're probably not studying for the GMAT because you love studying for tests. You know what I mean? Like if you are, we've got a spot for you at TGS, by the way. Please let us know, and we're happy to have that conversation. But for most of you, you're just trying to get this done, check this box, and check it well, of course, but like get it checked so that you can move on to the good stuff, which is like the business school experience and of course post-MBA experience. So that's what I'm going to focus on here. So yeah, I think memorizing like 23 times 5 is probably not going to net out, but doing long division on 115 by 5, that's a really helpful skill. We'll talk more about that later today. So again, I wanted to make that note since I'm glossing over a lot of the computational steps that I'd be making here, that a lot of people like fear long division, or they're like, oh, that's too slow. I'm not going to have time to do long division. And like, then they end up speeding through the problem and making a mistake. And it's like, look, we've talked so much about the psychological and emotional pressure of the exam. It is significant, but you're probably not going to win the psychological emotional pressure game by giving in to the way they want you to do it, which is just speeding through your calculations and making a mistake. Now, I might be wrong about that. If that's the solution for you, then that's amazing. Please, I'll never argue with your results. If it's working, by all means, keep doing it. But just, I I mean, I've done this with so many people at this point. I've watched so many people go through this process, everybody. It usually works out better if you just do some long division there. And so that's my advice. Um, we got a math basics episode on how to do long division linked below as well. No shame. I realized studying for the GMAT, I had never learned how to do long subtraction. So that was a fun moment in my 20s of like, wow, okay, going back to basics here. But again, it pays off great. I would totally do it again if I had the choice. So yeah, that's partly why we're here, to keep you from going through what I had to go through. So that would leave us with 100 over 23 times 9, which is technically 9 million. I reduced 45 million divided by 5. I canceled the 5 there to make it 9 million, but I'm just going to keep it as 9. So I'd have 100 over 23 times 9 over 1 equals x. And that's a much better situation to be in than 100 over 115 times 45 over 1 equals x. So let's consolidate our fractions by multiplying straight across the top and bottom. That would get us 900 over 23. Technically, it's 900 million over 23 equals x. But because all the answers are in millions, once again, we can basically just think of it as 900 over 23. But I'll just say one final time, if that's too confusing, the math's going to work out either way. Steps are going to be basically the same. So feel free to leave it as 900 with 6 zeros after it, since the long division is going to work out both ways. I've done a boatload of long division on the actual pod in the past, so I'm going to gloss over the exact long division steps here and keep the lesson on the simpler side. But again, that episode's below for you if you want a more detailed walkthrough. And if you have concerns about your process, please check out that Math Basics series. I put a ton of time, and everyone on the team did as well, into making that as like tight and clean of a Math Basics refresher as we possibly could get you. So really think you'll love that if you're just starting out. If you don't need help with that, that's cool. So if you perform the long division correctly, you're going to get 39.1 and then a bunch of numbers that never repeat after that if you keep going. So that does bring up an important question, which is like, when should I stop doing the long division process if it's just going on and on and on and on? And the simple answer there is just always use the answer options to guide you. Here we've got 38, 39, and 40 as options. And at the point you get 39 in the long division, it's definitely not going to be 38, so we could rule that one out. But if you kept going and you got 39.9, for example, then 40 would be the better answer, because remember, the question says to the nearest million, and 39.9 million is closer to 40 million than it is to 39 million. But here, if you do the long division to just that first decimal place, which is 39.1, at that point you can stop, because no matter what the other numbers are, the result is for sure going to be closer to 39. So as you're doing your long division, or if it's long multiplication or something really computationally intensive, always be glancing back and forth between the answers so that you don't like overcook the scratch work, if that makes sense. So that's our correct answer, which is option B, as in beta. Now comes the surprise, I think, for most of you. It was certainly a surprise for me. You want to guess how many people are missing this question? If you missed it, I'm not trying to be like a jerk about it. I apologize. I've just like was surprised by how many people are missing this. It's 26% of people miss this question. That is so much more than I would have predicted. That's more than 1 out of 4 of us in the like pre-MBA applicant pool, which is like a pretty elite academic group already, is not getting this right. So that's part of the reason I wanted to include this problem. And again, just really want to touch on this. It's understandable if you're just starting out and you're missing questions like this. Like I missed questions like this when I was starting out too. But long term, if you've been studying for a while, we definitely don't want you missing questions like this. It's a huge bottleneck. So let's see if we can remedy that situation going forward. Maybe even more interesting is the most common wrong answer is option A, which is 38 million. About 13% of people are picking that one. And the second most common wrong answer is option C, which is 40 million. About 9% of people pick that one. So what I find really interesting about that is it seems like the vast majority of people are getting pretty close here, which leads me to believe that people are setting the question up correctly. Like they understand the whole percent thing, but then they're fumbling the actual math. So they're not able to get to the like 38, 39, 40. The numbers are close enough together that a lot of people are just like getting close and then missing. So again, not trying to like, I don't know, not trying to poke fun at that at all. Again, it's like a really painful thing when you miss questions like this. I remember like it was yesterday. I'm still trying to forget how much my GMAT prep hurt, but here I am, obviously. So again, like I'm just it's laughter of recognition, you know what I mean? Like I've been there. I've missed the problems myself in that moment and felt the like all the feelings, let's put it that way. Don't want to harp on it, but also don't want you to think that I'm like being a jerk about this because that's definitely not my intention here. I'm trying to be as supportive as possible. But like stepping back from this, you think about like what we're trying to accomplish with our MBAs and like our post MBA goals, and then we're like dropping a question like this because we couldn't do the long division properly. It's like, okay, right, we should probably like help people fix that. It seems like a very fixable thing. So it's super avoidable. That's why I gave the tips I gave above. Don't be afraid to do some long division, everybody. The classics are classic for a reason, and it'll get the job done when you need something exact, like we definitely want here. This is not a situation where we want to be estimating. The answers are really close together, and we want to make sure we're on point. So, second, maybe think about rounding if you need to do long division with decimal places, just for the future, for example. So like if we got 39.5 in our long division, we would have wanted to go to the next decimal place. We would have wanted to keep going with the long division to see what happens so we know if we should round up or down. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that here, but I'm imagining how I would feel if I missed this question because I didn't take the time to do the long division properly, and that would be having me feel really bad. And it's part of the reason I'd feel bad is that's like a very controllable thing. That's what I was trying to touch on earlier. So there's probably going to be some questions on test day that you genuinely don't know how to do. And that's just like the nature of the exam. If you want to know more about that, you can check out the video on our website. It's totally free. I'll walk you through how the scoring system's pretty different on the GMAT than typical exams. So it's for most of us, like the vast majority of us, 99.9% of us, we're going to see at least a handful of questions we don't know how to do on the exam. That can be a new experience if you haven't taken adaptive tests like the GMAT in the past. And honestly, I think we can live with missing questions we don't know how to do on test day. Like I missed a good number of questions I didn't know how to do on my official exam, and I still got a 99th percentile score. So like, hopefully that's evidence enough that it's not required to get 100% correct here. And maybe it's not even desirable. That's why I put together that video on the site because that's what I was trying to do back in the day, get them all right. I don't know what that says about me, but I'm sure a lot of you can relate. And yeah, that a lot of times is not the optimal strategy on the GMAT, as crazy as that might sound. I know that might just sound like utter insanity to you, but yeah, there's a lot of disinformation there about how the exam is scored and how to prepare for it. And I gotta admit, I sometimes feel like it's getting worse every day. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I was scoping some GMAT content from some people out there on the internet today, and I thought, man, this would have really hurt me back in the day if I was taking this advice. So anyway, that's why I'm here trying to do the right thing, everybody. Um, so all that being said, let's just try to make sure that this stuff is stuff that you can get right, and that when this is stuff you can get right and you know the math, that you do actually get it right on test day. Like this is the type of question that I think we can all agree nobody going for a top tier MBA should be missing. I think we would pretty much all agree on that. So if you want to make like a note to self, like a text or email to yourself as a reminder of what you learned here for the future, by all means, please do so. I'll give some tips on what I think is best here in a sec. If you feel complete with that one and you're confident you won't make those kinds of mistakes, that's cool. But what would I do if I was working with someone who missed this question for that reason, or if I missed that question for that reason myself? For sure, I'd be thinking about like, hey, like don't try to take a shortcut here. It's not worth it. It's not worth shortcutting the investments that are probably going to pay off well and try to steal time from those, risk missing them, and then reinvest that time in questions you're probably not going to get right. That's the whole thing I was talking about with like some questions you'll definitely know how to do, some questions you might not. Instead, we want to make sure that you're spending the requisite time to get the questions you do know how to do right. And if you needed some like executable advice, I think when in doubt, do long division. That would be my advice here. And the second thing I would say is just make sure you're writing out all your algebra steps, because it's really easy to like drop a zero in the 100 or like write 16 instead of 15 or write a 15 that looks like a 16 because you're rushing. So what you're looking for with GMAT Quant is the right pace of execution. Yeah, obviously you don't want to go so painfully slow that you're like running out of time at the end, but obviously you don't want to go so fast that you're burnt, like you're missing a bunch of questions you know how to do along the way. Like neither of those things is going to get you a great result. And that sounds obvious to say, and that and I think all of us would like naturally think that, but you want to there's a big gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it under time pressure. And the gap there usually is conditioning. I've talked a lot about conditioning in the past. In fact, we've got a great episode called How to Score High Consistently on the GMAT. And I think it's from last year. And I go into like extreme depth on how you can get really, really good at being consistent, both with your scoring and like your execution of problems. But for this particular question, just look back and see if you skipped any steps. And if you skipped any steps in your algebra or skipped any steps in your long division, then just ask yourself, like, is that worth it? Was that trade of whatever, how much time I got back from skipping that step, did that pan out in the question? And I'm not telling you what the answer to that should be. For some of you, it probably will pan out, and that's cool. Again, if I'm never going to argue with your results. If what you're doing is working, keep doing it. But if you missed this question and you skipped some steps, that's almost certainly the problem. And you just need to accept, like, hey, you might not love writing every step down. I didn't, but I loved the results of writing every step down, and I think you will too. So hopefully that helps. Let's take a quick pause. I'll let you make your note if you want to. Just ask yourself, what do you want to remember from that question? And then let's try another one together. This is problem number 79. The problem says R, as in the letter R. R is the set of positive, odd integers less than 50. And S, letter S, is the set of the squares of the integers in R. How many elements does the intersection of R and S contain? Let me read that again. R is the set of positive, odd integers less than 50. And S is the set of the squares of the integers in R. How many elements does the intersection of R and S contain? Option A is none. Option B is 2. Option C is 4. Option D is 5. And option E is 7. Another interesting problem in, again, that 15% of people are missing this. So not as bad as the previous one, but it still seems high to me based on the caliber of folks in the applicant pool. So again, let's fix that for you, and let's make sure you get questions like this right. So if you haven't worked through the problem, I recommend pausing and doing so. There's a couple interesting concepts here, one being what's called the intersection of two sets of numbers. Overall, it looks like most people understand that based on the right-wrong answer distribution, which we'll talk more about in a second, but it's still worth defining that the intersection of two sets, that's the numbers that are common to both sets. So the numbers that are in both sets, that's the intersection of the two sets. It might be worth a note to self or a flashcard if you didn't know that. Also, we've got this terminology, S is the set of the squares of the integers. If this is an early touch for you in the GMAT process, you're unfamiliar with that terminology, check out the exponents lesson from the Math Basics series that we've got linked for you below. And then you should be able to come back to this and you'll be good. So outside of that, if you've been through the Math Basics series or you're solid with your Math Basics already, then the concepts in this question shouldn't be too tough to execute on. But again, if you are starting out and you didn't have great math instruction as a young person, then you can get upskilled through that program. It's totally free. And then this problem shouldn't be too bad for you after that. So if you're struggling conceptually with this kind of problem, meaning you feel like you didn't understand the math and operations behind it, that's what that series is for. So let's dig into a correct solution and then talk about why so many people are picking E as an echo, which is unfortunately not the right answer. So the first set, R, is all the odd integers less than 50. So like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. One of the best things you can do for your quant score is build the habit of writing something like that down. It's not usually a good idea to write more than 20 numbers. If there's a set of 15 numbers, a lot of times it's okay to just write all 15. But if there's a lot of numbers in the set, like there is here, like 50 or 100 numbers, then it's usually a good idea to just write the first few and then maybe the last few. And then you'll pretty much get like all the benefit that you need from the positive visual organization I was talking about in our first problem. So you're only writing maybe 3 to 10 values, but the benefit is still there. So the second set actually has exactly the same number of numbers. So I would recommend the same simple approach. Just write the first few numbers. I might not even write the last few numbers there because they're going to be really big because you're squaring some pretty large numbers. And that brings us to an important point. But just to tie off that point, just like first three numbers, last three numbers, if there's a bunch of numbers in a set, it works great for the whole visual organization thing. I don't want you to think that I'm recommending you write 100 numbers down. I'm not. Real quick, though, if you took my advice from earlier episodes in this series and you already wrote what was given and asked before you jumped into the math, then you might have already been clear that we're just looking for the numbers that the sets have in common. And so you won't have to write very many numbers for set S at all, because you'd realize that the intersection, what we're asked for here, can only contain numbers that are less than 50. And if you're squaring a bunch of numbers, they're going to get past 50 really, really fast. For example, let's just write out the squares of the first few positive odd integers. We've got 1 squared, which is 1. We've got 3 squared, which is 9. We've got 5 squared, which is 25. And we got 7 squared, which is 49. And then after that, we're already bigger than 50. So that for this particular problem could be like the only stuff you write out for S, and it would be all good. So it's not like some huge time saver there. If you took the time to write down 49 squared, it's probably not going to be a game changer, but I do think it's nice to not have to do that. So in a perfect world here, that actually leads us directly to our correct answer of 4, which is option C, as in Charlie. And that's because the first set is 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, all the way up to 49, like I was saying before. And the second set is just all those numbers squared. We just wrote out all the numbers in the second set that are less than 50, and because those are the only values that can be common to both sets, since every value is less than 50 in the first set, there's only going to be 4 of those, 1, 9, 25, and 49. So at that point, we're done. We're moving on to the next question. So in a situation like that, why are so many people picking E? I just want to give you a moment to think about that. The correct answer is 4. E is 7. Why might people be getting 7 here? 7 is what you get if you just miss the word odd in the original problem, and you think that set R is all the integers less than 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you just square all those and you get 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and then 36 and 49. Those are your 7 numbers. So if you went for that one, then your math was actually all correct. So that's great news. But unfortunately, you ended up answering something that the question was not asking. So I already mentioned the value of writing what's given and asked in questions. I've mentioned that probably just an absurd degree in this series. But for me personally, a lot of times I need to be reminded of that stuff a lot more than I need to be taught it. So hopefully I'm helping you out by doing that, and I apologize if it's annoying. I'm not trying to be annoying, just trying to be helpful. And just writing what's given and asked here carefully will help a ton with avoiding that kind of pitfall. But just in case that's not enough, for a lot of folks, I've realized like writing what's given and asked really helps them cut down the number of questions they know how to do but miss. But then they're still missing some. And if that's you, that's totally fine. That was me. I needed more than just that back in the day to get the score that I wanted and stop missing questions I knew how to do. And one of the best widely applicable approaches for situations like that is just a quick reread of the problem before you commit to an answer. If you find yourself missing questions like this a lot, even though you've done the math properly and you've written what's given and asked carefully, then a quick reread of the problem it really increases the odds that you're going to notice that word odd and then realize, oh, shoot, I was almost about to get that one wrong. And then you can readjust your approach. And that extra 5 to 20 seconds pretty much ends up being really, really worth it. So obviously it's not as efficient as just writing what's given and asked first and then never making the mistake. But if you're already doing that and you're still making the mistake, then you're going to want that extra step there. So outside of just keeping people from picking E here, we've also got a good number of people picking A and B. And I'm honestly not really sure why that's happening, but my guess is it's just not understanding the math behind the problem at all. So again, if that's you, just all you need is that Math Basics series. You should be good to go, but let us know if you have additional questions there. You can reach us at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels anytime. If you prefer to DM, you can email us. We are contact, C-O-N-T-A-C-T, contact at thegmatstrategy.com. Just reach out anytime. And we're always happy to help. So that's the main gist of that one. Take a moment and make a note to self if you think that would be helpful, and then let's round out our lesson with one more question. This is problem number 83. And at this point in this series, I'm going to start skipping over some of the simple questions that repeat a lot of the stuff that I've already talked about. I'll put some repetition in. Like I was just saying, I think some repetition is really valuable for the learning process, especially for that conditioning piece. A lot of times, I'll just speak for myself. When I know what I need to do, but I'm not doing it, I usually just need to be reminded of it more often. Simple thing, but it gets the job done. So I'll throw some of that stuff in here as we proceed, but I'm also going to start just getting us into some different and deeper concepts and like other types of mistakes, just so that the series doesn't get too repetitive, if that makes sense. So definitely give us feedback if you feel like that's a good move or a bad move. We always love hearing from all of you. So this is problem 83. The problem says, what is the decimal equivalent of 1 over 5 to the fifth power? It's 1 over 5 in parentheses raised to the exponent of 5. I'll read that again. What is the decimal equivalent of 1/5 to the fifth power? Option A is 0.00032. Option B is 0.0016. Option C is 0.00625. Option D is 0.008. Option E is 0.03125. Okay, recommend pausing and seeing if you can get a good solution, or again, at least visualizing what you would write down. It's a really good mental workout for you if you're on the go. Much like the previous problems, on the surface, I think this one could look fairly straightforward to a lot of people. It at least is not very long. But we've got 22% of people missing this one. So let's figure out how to bring that number down and get everyone on the right track here. First things first, let me try to give some tips for a quick and clean correct solution. If you've been following the series for a bit, you might recall that recently I recommended memorizing the decimal equivalents of certain fractions that show up a lot on the test. Just to rehash that briefly, it's good to know your thirds, fourths, fifths, eighths, ninths, and elevenths as decimals. So like you want to know what 3/11 is as a decimal for the GMAT. I know most of us are probably not walking around adult life thinking like, oh, what's 3/11 again? Probably not using that on a regular basis. But for the GMAT, it's really helpful. So basically, I'm recommending memorizing everything except your sixes and sevens up to 11. But most people know what 1/2 is as a decimal, so I'm kind of leaving that out. But I guess it technically is included. So everything except your sixth and your seventh usually pays. So this question is actually a really good example of that, because if you can quickly reframe 1/5 as 0.2, you can make the question go a lot faster. More on that in a second. Another important tip that I've given in this series, and that I gave in the Math Basics program as well, is to memorize your powers of 2 up to 2 to the 10th power. So like you'll want to know what 2 to the 3rd is, what 2 to the 5th is, what 2 to the 8th is off the top of your head. I'm saying that because most professional adults are not walking around the world being like, oh yeah, 2 to the 7th, I use that all the time. That would be unusual. But on the GMAT, it's really helpful if you can just rattle that off. So this question, again, is a good example of those two things coming together. High exponents with a base of 2 show up a lot. Here, if we reframe the problem as 0.2 to the 5th power instead of 1/5 to the 5th power, that's essentially taking 2 to the 5th with some extra considerations for the decimal place. So if you've taken the above advice, then you'd already have memorized that 2 to the 5th is 32, and this question is going to go really well, really fast at that point, because the only answer that even has the number 32 in it is A, and that is the correct answer. A is an alpha. That's a great example of how some of the advice I've given you in the past could pay off in a major way, because if you think about this problem like that, you're probably getting it right in like 15 seconds. Like, no lie, you could do that. Now, is that the goal? Not on every question. Like I've said, most questions should have a methodical, written out approach. But this is the kind of question where you could definitely get away without that. So I think the balance, the right balance of those things is what we're going for in an ideal approach. And that's what I've seen work best for the widest number of people, is the ones where you can make a quick hit, you make that hit confidently because you've done the preparation. But then in the ones that are more intricate and more involved, that have more steps, and maybe there's the answers are closer together, like that first one we talked about, or like maybe 32 shows up in a couple answers and it's like 0.032, 0.0032, 0.00032. Like you'll definitely see questions like that. That would be a little bit tougher. But on a question like this, where they basically just serve that up on a silver platter, if you've done your memorization and your diligence ahead of time, that's a great time to harvest that investment, if that makes sense. So it's really nice payout. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way to do the problem or that it's even the best way to do the problem, but it would be my preferred way of doing the problem personally. But you can grind out the math, and in the Math Basics series, we've given you all the tools to do that. For example, you can manually calculate 5 to the 5th and then use decimal long division to figure out that that's 0.00032. Totally cool. I would have no problem with someone doing the problem that way. It's going to take a bit longer, but there's relatively little risk of missing this question that you probably know how to do if you've done the upskilling on the basic math. Similarly, you could grind out the long multiplication of 0.2 times itself 5 times, which is also going to take a little bit longer than the first approach, but it's going to make it super unlikely that you get this question wrong. So if you're more comfortable with that, do that. I guess the point I want to make though here is that, okay, that stuff's valuable, but like if all it took was memorizing some things to get the question right in about 15 seconds, or like just doing some long division or some long multiplication with decimals, why are so many people getting this question wrong? So yes, I do want you to be aware of some of the shortcuts, but I've already I've already mentioned many of those shortcuts in past episodes, and I just wanted to make the point, like it's a good example of those paying out. But I did really want to spend most of our time talking about the wrong paths that people go down here and making sure you protect yourself from that. So let's consider the most common incorrect answer, which is E, as in echo. 14% of people are picking that option. On first glance, it might seem like maybe people are thinking like, okay, that's close to 32, and like maybe that's why people are picking it, which definitely could be the case. But if you think a little bit deeper about the problem, you'll realize that 3125 is actually 5 to the 5th exactly. If you put 5 to the 5th power in a calculator, that's what you'd get. So what it seems like is happening here is people are manually computing 5 to the 5th, writing it as 1 over 3125, and then thinking that the way to express that as a decimal is 0.03125. And let's really focus on that, because that's definitely not how fractions and decimals work. And the fact that so many of us are going down that path shows that there's some kind of fundamental misunderstanding there about the relationship between decimals and fractions. So if you went for E, we've got a decimal long division math basics episode below. It's specifically about long division with decimals. Really recommend checking that out. That's going to help you understand the proper link between fractions and decimals. From there, if you check out the fractions and exponents episode, you're going to basically be able to teach a master class on how to not pick E on this question, which is really going to help your GMAT score, really going to help your odds of getting into your dream business school program. So I think those episodes are like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes long at the most. So it's an hour of your time to get to the next level. I will give you a quick preview of that though, just to save you some time, and tell you it is extremely rare, everybody, that you're going to have the numbers in a fraction directly line up with the numbers in the decimal representation of that fraction. That almost never happens. Just think about a simple example like 1 over 2, which as a decimal is 0.5. There's no numbers in common there. In fact, it is so rare that the numbers and fractions directly line up with their decimal equivalent that you can essentially be sure that it is a trap answer when you see that happening. And if you think about the kind of mind that would make option E an answer choice here in the first place, then you'll start to realize what we are up against on this exam. This is a very craftily written exam. Like for me personally, I'll just speak for myself. I would not think that adding 0.03125 as an answer choice here was really going to trick that many people. And yet, the numbers are fairly certain here. We got, I think, about 3,500 data points here on this problem. And yeah, we got 14% of people picking that one. So yeah, just thought we'd head that off with the pass with a quick tip. Like it's virtually 0%. Like it basically rounds down to 0, the odds that you would see a fraction and then see the decimal equivalent, and they would basically be the same number. So please just triple check your math if something like that's happening. I'm not saying it's impossible. It could happen. It could be, 3125 as the decimal. But here, so many people are going for that. I thought it might be helpful to mention that. I hope it is. Second most common wrong answer is 0.0625, which is option C, as in Charlie. Sorry, 0.00625. And if you think about that for a second, 625 is 5 to the fourth power. And so what looks like is happening there for people is people are actually doing the math incorrectly. They're doing 5 to the fourth instead of 5 to the fifth. They're getting 1 over 625, and then they're believing that will directly translate to the decimal point 0.00625. And even if we just set the math mistake of 5 to the fourth versus 5 to the fifth aside for a sec, which is easily remedied, by the way, by any of the tips I gave just a moment ago. And if we consider that we put C and E together, we've got 19% of people making that mistake between fractions and decimals. And that seems like just something really fixable. Like, let's just fix all of that together. Let's join hands here digitally across the ethers of technological space. And let's all protect our business leadership brothers and sisters and everybody in between from making that mistake on this problem. Now, I do want to make a really important point here for folks of you who are like me, where you just didn't have the right math instruction as a young person. It sucks. I was at a huge disadvantage starting my GMAT prep process here. I made all kinds of simple math mistakes when I was studying for this exam, and that honestly added months to my timeline that it should not have. And I'm not trying to say like, you're a bad person if you make a mistake on a question like this. That is a very honest mistake. I'm telling you, like, I've made that mistake probably 100 times if we look at my scratch work from when I was prepping back in the day. I mean, a truly embarrassing amount of times I made that mistake, I'm sure. What I'm saying, though, is it's extremely important that we correct that mistake. It's not something that should be happening. So I've taken a lot of time. So is the team behind TGS to create that Math Basics series and keep it up to date for you. So that's there for you. Should help a lot. And I had to teach all that stuff to myself when I was relearning this. So a lot of that stuff I was learning for the first time, like I told you before. So I'm just trying to make things easier for you by putting together a system that you can use to fast track your progress. And that system has been proven out thousands and thousands of times at this point with a lot of really, really awesome results from some people who worked really, really hard. And I was lucky to be on their team and be able to give them some advice along the way. So you can trust that this stuff really works. I hope that helps. Definitely not trying to be discouraging to anybody, trying to do the opposite, trying to encourage all of you, whether you had great math instruction as a kid and you're way ahead of all the rest of us here, that's awesome. Good for you. Keep going. If you had really bad instruction as a kid, or you just feel like you never got math, even though it wasn't your teacher's fault or something, like there's all kinds of things that can happen as young people. And it's time to just accept that is what it is. And if you want this to happen, you just put your head down and just do the work, and you'll be there and you'll be great at doing GMAT math before you know it. That's what happened for me. It took a lot longer than I wanted it to originally. I would have been great if I could just take a pill and instantly be great at it, but that did not exist, doesn't exist right now to my knowledge. So this is the next best thing I could think of. Trying to make the limitless pill for GMAT prep here for you. And that's probably way more than I should have even said about that. But I just want you to know you're not alone if you're in that situation, and it's okay to be embarrassingly bad at math as you're starting this process. As long as you don't give up, you'll get there. Okay. And many people have gone before you, and they, put in the hard yards. You can do it too. If you need help with your discipline or your consistency, I already mentioned we got some episodes on that for you in the feed. So just search those words in the feed and we got you covered. So, very hopeful that the advice I gave you there will be a big help. Again, I gave some advice about how to memorize. I gave some advice about how to avoid traps that come up a lot on these questions. Take a pause and make a note to self if that would be helpful for you. Otherwise, we're going to be back soon with some more examples of tricks, traps, how to avoid them, how to do well, and how to structure your approach so you can get the fastest, best results possible and get on to the good stuff. If you have questions about any of this material, or you're struggling with your prep and you want some unbiased advice, feel free to message us at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels anytime, or email us at contact@thegmatstrategy.com. As always, if you want even more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the exam, please head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, which is linked in the description of this content, and check out our free video on how you can reach your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. I know that sounds crazy, but if you knew what I knew, you could do it. So that's what I try to put in that video for you. In the meantime, this is a regular show, so please subscribe and please stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. Talk to you all soon.